Hello and welcome to the first in a series of weekly videos charting the construction of my bespoke wall-to-wall bedroom wardrobe system. Now, I've got to confess, most of this project is still very much up here in my head, but I'm hoping to build something like this that I saw a couple of years back in my day job at a customer's house. Putting a project like this together can be as intimidating as it's exciting, but it's well worth doing because you'll end up saving yourself a fortune in the long run. And I hope you'll see after this series of videos that you really can achieve something pretty impressive with everyday DIY tools. And as usual, I'm going to be pointing out each week all the mistakes I've made, and believe you me, at the end of this first week of the build, there have been quite a few of these. So let's start by running through the methodology of the build itself. First off, I'm constructing a plinth out of 25 by 100mm planed redwood for the wardrobe to sit on. Secondly, the wardrobe will be made out of 5 carcasses plus top boxes above, each made out of 18mm moisture resistant MDF. And thirdly, the doors will be made from a 12mm moisture resistant MDF base piece with 12mm MDF rails and stiles pinned and glued to the front, rather like these that I made for my last project. Now, professional carpenters would say this is cheating, but I don't have a domino machine or a router table, and making the doors this way is incredibly easy to do with everyday DIY tools and also incredibly strong with these Blum hinges. There will also be internal shelves and drawers, which I'll talk about in more detail when I get to that part of the build. So let's have a quick run through of the tools and materials that are going to be involved in this project. We've got my instant workshop, already a complete game changer for keeping all that MDF dust safely outside. A link to my recent workshop build video is coming up on screen now. For how I made my folding workbench, check out the links in the description below this video. I've got moisture resistant MDF in 12 and 18mm sheets. 25 by 100mm planed redwood for the plinth and 25 by 125mm planed redwood, which I'll be ripping down into narrower strips for the front trim of the wardrobe. I ordered this wood through buildingmaterials.co.uk, partly because of the COVID situation, but also to remove the usual hassle factor. In short, after my initial email telling them what I needed, they did all the legwork for me and organised the supply and delivery of the wood through a local timber merchant. They did give me a discount for giving them a shout out on this video, but depending on whether you go for standard, moisture resistant or premium moisture resistant MDF, these are the sort of prices you'll be looking at for the quantities that I ordered. For the shelves, I ordered this 25mm thick sheet of birch ply from a local timber merchant's, which I've got to say at £102 including VAT was shockingly expensive. I'll be using these Blum concealed hinges for thick doors with die cast mounting plates that I loved using previously on my daughter's wardrobe doors. This time bought through tradehinges.co.uk. And again, these drawer runners had previously been fantastic. This black version may go better with my dark paint scheme, or there's these concealed drawer runners from Blum, but just look at the price. I'm going to be installing LED strip lighting in the wardrobes activated with these sensors, and I'm going to attempt to route an angled groove into the wardrobe ceiling to accommodate the strips. A selection of brackets from Ironmongery Direct, these nickel shelf supports and studs, my Ryobi and Evolution circular saws, electric plane, and although less crucial, my Evolution single bevel mitre saw, a light drill driver, and these Spax 4x50mm MDF screws. There will obviously be other tools, but this is the main component list, and I'll keep updating it in each video and of course in the description below each video, and at the end of the project I'll give you a full breakdown of all the costs involved. Before we plough into the plinth build, let's have a quick chat about the importance of doing scale drawings at the outset of any wardrobe build. To an extent this is less important if you're building out a symmetrical rectangular space. But in my case, in my enthusiasm to maximise the height of the carcasses up to this point here where the sloping ceiling met the wall, I hadn't appreciated how much the ceiling slopes from one side of the room to the other. So do I follow the line of the ceiling and create asymmetric top boxes, or do I make them horizontal and put some sort of filler piece above them? Now the second option is obviously the most sensible, and had I drawn this out at the outset I would have realised it would have left me with 200mm for storage above the wardrobes, which just isn't practical. Programs like SketchUp would be a fantastic way to get this project off on the right foot. But because I don't know how to use that, I've used this freehand designer pad that I used to use to record measures in my day job, and I'll post a link to this in the description below the video. Now, to work out what materials I needed, I came up with a series of cutting lists for the plinth, carcasses, doors, and internal drawers and shelves. These are a bit crude, and it has been pointed out to me there are programs out there to help you with this. So if there's a particular cutting list program you've used, ideally free or as a trial version, because we're not going to be doing this very often, it would be amazing if you could let us know in the comment section below. So let's have a chat about the plinth, shown here, waiting to be screwed together at the end of day one. Now there's two reasons why I've gone for these plinths rather than say adjustable feet under each carcass. Number one, there's going to be quite a lot of weight bearing down on this floor when the wardrobe is constructed. And having a plinth like this better spreads the weight across the floor. Number two, and more importantly, my floor, as you'll see in a minute, is incredibly uneven, and the idea of trying to align up each carcass using adjustable feet is just somewhere I didn't want to go. With a perfectly horizontal plinth, sliding on and lining up each carcass is going to be child's play. I decided to plot the exact position of each carcass and therefore the plinth structure on the floor using masking tape, and as the back wall of the wardrobe is uneven, I used a taut string line across the room to determine the final position of the front of the wardrobe, which I've decided to make 620mm from the back wall, giving me a final internal depth for each wardrobe of just under 600mm. I knew from earlier on in the renovation project that this bedroom floor was incredibly uneven, and with a huge 25mm dip in the centre of the room, I decided to scribe the plinth to the contours of the floor, although you could, if you prefer, use something like this. Scribing is a lovely little technique to learn and it's so useful. Basically, using these glazing packers, I put a few under one end to get the top of the plinth level and then set my scribe to the widest part of the gap. There are scribing tools, but I favour the unsophisticated approach, and then you simply draw your pencil down the length of the plinth to draw a perfect impression of the uneven floor on the plinth. And then it was down to the pop-up workshop in my garden I assembled last week to cut out the scribed section with my old Bosch jigsaw. Jigsaws typically make for a pretty inaccurate cut, or my old one does anyway, so I always have my vintage block plane and also my electric plane handy to tidy up the cuts afterwards. So with the front and back sections of the plinth now scribed and perfectly level, I then had the additional headache of getting them level from front to back. To remove this thin slither, I use my circular saw with its fence. A quick tip, whenever using a circular saw, it's crucially important to set it so that only half a tooth of the blade protrudes below the wood you're cutting. Any more than that and the saw will wander all over the place. With the plinth lengths now level both across the room and from the front to the back of the wardrobe, it was time to cut and insert the cross members that will support the weight of each wardrobe carcass where they butt up to each other. I've decided to double up each cross member where the two carcasses meet. This was no easy job because I had to cut each one individually to match the height of the plinth at the front and back. But the circular saw came to the rescue again, this time using one of the track saw guides that I made in the summer. I haven't used it since making the video, and it worked a dream to make these tricky cuts across each plinth section. And after each cut, a quick blast with my Ryobi leaf blower kept the workbench clear. Cross members were then slotted into place, and in terms of screwing the plinth together, after a bit of experimenting, I settled on a pattern of piloting each hole with a 2.5mm lip and spur wood bit, and then using these 8x2" Quicksilver twin thread wood screws. There was no need to countersink the holes with the wood so soft. And then it was on to construction of the carcasses. The carcasses themselves are simply 5 sheets of moisture resistant MDF screwed together, the 4 18mm thick sides and then a 12mm thick rear. The rear panel helps you to get the carcass square, but also gives it rigidity when you lift it into place. Now, typically when you make carcasses, you're going to want to construct them like this, particularly if these are wall mounted carcasses, because then you don't see the end grain and it's much stronger than if you were to construct it like this. It also makes it easier for you preparing your cut lists, because then your top and bottom and all your shelves can be the same width. But in my case, I'm not going to be seeing the sides of the carcasses. With the carcass sat on the plinth, it's going to be much stronger if the sides of the carcass are sat on the base, particularly if, for example, a heavy weight was to be put into the wardrobe, and if the base was entirely reliant on its screws into the side of the carcass. I haven't used moisture resistant MDF much in the past, but I felt it was about time I did, as it's pretty much standard on any professional wardrobe build. I have a feeling that it'll be less prone to warping, which will be helpful when I construct the doors, and I'm not planning on painting the sides and the back of my wardrobe, which wouldn't be an issue here because I've insulated this wall as part of the renovation, but you'd be surprised how many people have told me about problems with mould building up inside wardrobes that butt up against a cold external wall. So get these walls insulated, and for more tips, check out the video coming up on screen now. The plan is to hide all the cut edges of the carcasses behind a pine fascia, and so I've designed the base to project out to the front of the plinth like this, with the sides recessed back the thickness of the fascia. I'll then finish the wardrobe with a skirting that will cover the plinth and the cut edge of the carcass base. So the key for a DIY build like this is to get clean, square, straight cuts. Now, I fully expected to be using my Ryobi circular saw for this project, but the saw guide that I made for it in the summer, check out the link to the video coming up on screen now, has unfortunately become a bit warped because of the way it's been stored in my garage over the winter. Basically got a 2mm deviation in the middle. So I've instead had to revert to my hybrid circular saw, with admittedly pretty satisfying results. Well, I've got to be honest, the big downside of this saw, even over my Ryobi, which has quite a good dust collection, is that the additional extraction duct is obviously designed for suction extraction only, as it blocked up immediately with my improvised extraction bag. Cutting a lot of MDF is a pretty unpleasant process, so you need a mask and also some kind of blower. I don't know what I'd do without my Ryobi. Now, I call this a hybrid because it's a circular saw that runs on a track, and you normally just see that with plunge saws. The saw came with two 700mm tracks that I bolted together for the crosscuts, and I purchased these two 1400mm tracks to bolt together to rip down full sheets of MDF. Using tracks like this is so much easier and more accurate than simply pushing your circular saw against a straight edge. And the beauty of these tracks is they fit my Axminster clamps. As well as obviously the clamps that come supplied with the kit. The sheet of 18mm MDF is heavy, and after lugging the first sheet down into my workshop, for all subsequent sheets I used this little caster wheel I made a couple of years ago to cart my workbench around. I realised the track saw guide is a far superior straight edge to the one I was using. And notice the use of the sacrificial protective strips underneath the cutting surface. Although stupidly on a few occasions I forgot to reduce the height of the blade when switching from 18 to 12mm MDF cuts. So with the pieces for the first few carcasses cut to size, it was just a question of fixing them together in the room itself, this being infinitely easier than carrying them in from outside. To screw the carcasses together, I'm using these brilliant Spax 4x50mm MDF screws that I recently discovered. No pre-drilling necessary or bulging in the MDF, although I have been piloting the initial hole just to make my life a bit easier. To get around the problem of the chimney projecting out of the wall, I'll need to angle the three carcasses affected like I did here, which I fine-tuned with my electric plane, although I could have made the angled cut with my circular saw. And with the first three carcasses in position, that was the end of week one. So that's it for week one. Not as much progress as I would have liked, but I had all that head scratching at the start to work out the wardrobe dimensions and then the tricky plinth to construct. So that is why projects like this always get off to a bit of a sluggish start. And then of course I've got to reduce the height of these carcasses by 100mm to accommodate the top boxes. But hopefully you'll tune in next week, by which time, with any luck, I will have finished the carcasses and the top boxes and routed the grooves for all of the lighting. And before you go, as I always say, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you soon.